Thank you for everybody for being here, and we are going to do the second part of our, or third part of our colloquium, which is our panel on critical issues in technology and national security. This panel will be moderated by Professor Kenyatte from IC2Tech, and we have three other panelists with him. I'll leave it for him to introduce them, and the floor is yours, Professor Kenyatte.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So my name is Kenyatte Simuel, and I am a department chair of cybersecurity, IT support, network infrastructure, and cloud technologies at IC2Tech Community College. I'm also our statewide lead chair for a curriculum committee for statewide cybersecurity for IC2Tech as well. And I want to introduce my panel that I have here. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Diane Janosek, and she is a cybersecurity leader, award-winning writer. She is CEO of Janos LLC. She has published over 30 technical academic articles and book contributions. She has a minor and bachelor's of arts with French and Russian minors, JD, so a lawyer in cyber leadership, and she holds industry certifications in cybersecurity and ethics and compliance. And then also I'd like to introduce Dr. Glenn Hernandez, who is who's a retired captain of the U.S. Coast Guard, senior consultant for OpEdge Solutions, and he has also authored the Coast Guard Cybersecurity Strategy Guide and led Coast Guard's first ever cyber crisis response framework. And then we also have Rami Salahieh, and he is the assistant professor and program chairperson for cybersecurity and information assurance at IC2Tech Community College for the Valparaiso campus, and is also is part of the FBI task force, and is also the co-chair for cybersecurity curriculum for IC2Tech. So thank you, everyone, and definitely appreciate you on this panel, and also appreciate everyone attending online, and like to say thank you to all the students who are also participating. You know, lots of different technologies and a lot of different cross disciplines to learn from, and this will definitely benefit you moving forward. So with that being said, I have a panel of questions, and we'll get started with Dr. Janosek. And I'd like to add, and this is also open to the floor on any of these questions, but I'll pose this one to Dr. Janosek first. What are the most significant emerging technologies that present both opportunities and challenges for national security in the next decade?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning from where you are in your time zone. I'm Dr. Janosek. Thank you so much for having me. I want to thank Captain Hernandez for the introduction and inviting me to join this esteemed panel. And kudos to all the students. You know, the future is yours. Yeah, there's so much change going on. It's so dynamic. I almost wish I could go back 30 years and start my career now, an educational journey now, because there's so many things that you're learning that didn't even exist when I was around. So kudos to all of you for being so forward-leaning and really embracing the area of microelectronics as well as cybersecurity and national security. So just at a very big picture level, we often hear dual-use technology, right? Things that can be used for governments as well as for industry benefits. So things that have, you know, twofold benefit to it. And the challenge is, and we've seen this now in a number of areas, especially just the last couple of weeks, the challenge is what technologies are appropriately dual use and what technology should be controlled, right? Depending upon how much they contribute to a nation state's benefit or advantage over the other nation states, they may want to keep it and lock it hold. So, keep it close and say, we're going to use that natural resource for ourselves. We're not going to share that. We just saw that with China. Obviously, those natural minerals go into components, and the components make up devices that are dual use in terms of potentially for espionage or just national defense, countermeasures, weapon systems, or versus just, everyday business in terms of doing what you're doing throughout the daily enterprise within the industrial base that we have here in the United States. So I think that is the real challenge. Is it's not just necessarily the technology that's we have to be concerned about or where that's going. We have to get down to the component level, because now everyone's fighting over the component level. And an analogy that you can think about is people used to fight over, or they still do in some ways, water, like who owns the water, who owns the river, who gets access to that particular dam. We even saw this going on with Panama. So even in, water was always considered to be, and is still, very necessary resources for countries, and how they react and how they move forward on that is really dictated a number of things. And even if you go back and look at the laws and the cases that were brought in the United States in the 1800s, there was cases that were brought between states to the Supreme Court to resolve water rights. So if you just extrapolate that and move it to the present, now the global environment, those boundaries are now these micro components and the micro minerals. And that's where I really think is the emerging part of where national security meets microelectronics. So that's kind of the big picture level. So I'll turn it over to my colleagues to probably weigh in more specific on some specific areas, if that's good for you, Professor.
Absolutely. So, let's throw it over to, let's go to Rami on that one to kind of follow up on that question.
Yeah, so emerging technology right now is important. I know Dr. Diane, she mentioned very critical point in here. I could really add a critical one. Of course, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, quantum computing is really, it's one of the leader one here. I can talk about the quantum computing. I teach cryptography, and I have done a lot of degrees in background encryptions. The current system right now work with the classical computer is very difficult for people to understand that when you get into quantum computing, when you actually have the concept of superposition and representation of qubit, that can speed up the process really of encrypting this data. And that's put us as on a national national security threat, that cyber actors from other nations, they can design a technology, they can speed up process of decrypting our technology, encryption technology. So now that leads us into quantum encryption. And what is the research right now taking place in the United States in Terminal University in providing a post-quantum encryption? And that's really one of the, excuse me, this is one of the critical point in here. Over.
Lanny?
Sure. No, thank you very much, Professor, and good morning, good afternoon to all the attendees and my esteemed panelists. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share. So my upbringing is a little bit different from my fellow panelists because I came out of the Coast Guard Academy with an electrical engineering degree. Right. And so initially I thought, wow, I'm going to go out into the Coast Guard and develop the latest high-tech equipment that we can utilize for our service. But what the Coast Guard, at least in their culture, in terms of delivering the talent and the future generation leaders, they really drive operations first, right? That's the initial concept of what the service was supposed to do for any individual that's coming in to the service. You need to understand what exactly is the purpose, the why for the organization. The technology follows later, whether it's the ships, the aircraft, the systems that we were delivering. It was really important for everyone, especially from the decision makers, understand what's the concept of operations that we're delivering for the nation and for our citizens and for those in distress. And so I really appreciate that almost 5 years of operations and understanding how does the organization put everything together, not only from the technology, the integration, and the level of communications throughout, but also the level of partnerships. The reliance that we had on our partners at the state, local level, internationally, and federal, it was very important because when it comes to national security, not having that concept of operations really puts us as a disadvantage as strictly as an engineer. So if you gave the requirements and deliver the specification for what you want to deliver, the context is missing. Absolutely, they'll deliver the technology, but the context in terms of how it's going to be utilized is missing. So how this connects to emerging tech is that as emerging tech comes, right, there's advances in miniaturization, and we had a great presentation before this panel on some of the indicators on what you can identify as risk in the production process. But when it gets to integrating that emerging tech into operations, there's got to be that decision maker in the loop of the process to understand, okay, it's great that it's advanced, it's great that it's miniaturized, it's great that it has all these fancy features, but does it meet the intended purpose, right? And what is that purpose going to be for the organization? And so that leads to, okay, so you identify the why, and now you go back, can I trust the process to deliver what the technology is going to provide for our service persons throughout any place in the world? Will it have the connectivity? Will it have the assurance, the reliability? And so through that process, there's going to be another model, I could say, beyond the processing that understands what are the indicators of compromise in the implementation of that technology. So regardless of the emerging tech, yes, we're going to talk about the manufacturing process, what are those indicators, but later on in discussion, I'll talk about some of my zero trust philosophy on how it could be applied here. But that's my initial thoughts, and I'll pause there.
Fantastic. And I actually liked I definitely like the fact that you talked about the why. And there's a lot of things that go into that when we talk about how do we make policy, how not only at a organizational level for private sector, but also how do we make national policy? And my question is, and this is going to be probably the question where I know the answer to, is how effectively are current and legal frameworks addressing those challenges posed by emerging technologies to national security today? And I kind of want to couple that as well with how can policymakers adapt to this rapid change of technology? Whether we're talking about AI or quantum computing, some of our policymakers are still wrapping their head around social media. So how do we deal with that, and how do we create frameworks, and how can our policymakers, either in public or in private, effectively manage this change? And I want to give that question to you, Glenn.
Actually, I'm going to defer because I think Diane has a great perspective on this, especially with her international global speaking. She's had an opportunity to understand from a global perspective some of the ramifications of the legal frameworks and seeing how other countries, but I want to give her the opportunity to sort of chime in first, and I can follow.
All right, Dr. Diane?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Captain Hernandez. So I'd like to always start off, since we're in the United States, in terms of, how the U.S. is structured. And it goes back to, your sixth grade social studies and, us being the United States of America. And that means there's 50 states all with some type of independence. And it's interesting in the last number of years how, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. The last couple of years, they are moving towards more looking at state rights. So in terms of states having more, it's supposed to be a federal system, and then you have the state level system. And so that's one concern that I think that's important in the legal and policy framework that I'm going to be talking about. So then we also have the states versus the federal, but even within the federal branch, and this is how it's different internationally, within the United States, we don't have one centralized focus for cybersecurity regulations and really across sectors, right? Because you have the Department of Transportation that does regulations for the transportation sector. You have the Department of Energy doing energy sector specific regulations and requirements and policy setting and priorities. And so as you go through the different sectors, you have this mismatch in terms of kind of what the policies are and where things are. So you move to today, right? So that was set up a while back. You move to today, and what we realize is most of these components cross sectors. You know, you design things for multi-sector. So then who has primacy? Which federal agency? Which state? How does that work? And can we just issue an edict to say, hey, we only want you to do such and such? Well, you saw that, how hard it was when they're trying to issue the edict with the social media platform with TikTok, right? That was trying to get one federal, law across the land. You can see how hard it is. So that is not the model for other countries internationally, right? They actually have the ability to issue an edict, much more simpler and more effective than we do in the United States. So there's a lot of control that can be exercised at a nation state policy level that does not align with how we do stuff in the United States. And you can imagine when you come here to this country, it's like, it's all about, equality and, every man, should be able to be a capitalist, and every man and woman should be able to be a capitalist and kind of move forward. So in the technology cybersecurity area, it's very different because we are just different. We're a different animal in terms of how we actually govern amongst ourselves. So in that way, you see in the United States, because of that, there's a lot of voluntariness in terms of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the NIST. They're trying to do some voluntary things, say, hey, why don't we all agree to these certain protocols? Why don't we agree to what this is kind of like the framework that we should all apply? I was on a call with the Cloud Security Alliance last week. They're trying to establish some type of industry standards that people can voluntarily come forward with. So they're saying we'd rather take voluntary standards than be dictated to, right? It's where you quash regulation with innovation. Regulation quashes innovation. So we're always struggling to find that happy medium, especially in the United States, where we have gone with respect to software development. And we are really one of the leaders, right, in software development in the world. So we don't want to quash our innovation with too much regulation. So the effectiveness of the legal and policy frameworks is that it's always trying to catch up. Where if you have, like if you've seen in China, even in London, in England, they can do a lot more, in multiple countries, a lot more edicts in terms of this is the way that we're going. So in some ways, and that's what we saw with China coming out and saying, you know what, we're going to make a decision where you can't do any of it. That decision, you're not going to be able to sell these certain types of minerals that are natural resources that are precious. Can you imagine for that decision to have come across in the United States, how long that would have taken and how many states would have to be involved in saying, no, you can't dictate to me? So we have a natural tension in the United States because our legal and policy framework is constantly catching up to where it needs to go. So there is a lot of rapid change. And that's why the most important things, I believe, is when you have what you usually find, and I've worked for multiple presidents, and I've been seeing it's more in the last 20 years or so, the policy positions are more prominent in terms of them putting those people forward first for Senate confirmation. So usually policy was kind of like behind the scenes, but no, now policy in the United States anyway, at the federal level, is very much front and center. It's usually the third person, one of the third top, 10 people to be put forward is usually a head policy person. And usually that policy person now is not just a strict legal background or policy background, but that has the technical component as well. So they understand the implications of what they're doing, because you no longer can be in a position to effect change if you don't actually realize the extent or the impact that a particular policy decision could have. So that was what really encouraged me to then supplement my law degree with the PhD in cyber and a couple of other, another degree and a couple of other certifications, because you can't be effective as a leader in the policy and legal realm in the Washington, D.C. area if you don't have technical background. So that's where you're constantly trying to catch up, but that's the natural tension. So hopefully I set that up for Glenn to kind of take it forward.
No, you did. So if you allow me the opportunity, thank you, Doctor. So what I really leveraged the opportunities I had in the Coast Guard was not only was I an engineer, but I was also regulatory functions that the Coast Guard had. So I was a regulator. I was also an international standards participant with delegations from the United States going to the International Maritime Organization in London, participating with 173 plus countries around the world, and trying to understand how can we leverage our understanding of best practices in the United States for the safety of the maritime environment throughout the world. And it was very challenging. And you can imagine, here, 50 states and our form of government, but trying to do that within an international body that was so large, has all these competing views, and you have different alliances. And so what I learned from that experience internationally was that it really relies on cooperation and partnership and alliances. And without those alliances, it's very difficult to get consensus on what direction any body needs to make in regards to the direction they want to proceed for the citizens, for the safety, and for, I think what Diane was really alluding to, how do you balance that regulatory framework against the opportunities for innovation to still take hold and advance society? And so I think the policy framework is definitely going to lag here in the United States, but from a perspective, at least in development in software, and I'll take a particular model, you put it out there, you sort of see how it survives and let the user sort of give you that feedback. Well, the United States is learning how the EU is implementing their GDPR and their DORA regulations. And so the United States has an opportunity to see what are some of the effects, what are some of the pros and cons. And so I think we'll continue to see that advancement in other countries and other parts of the world trying to implement, like Diane said, because they have the opportunity to directly through edict to implement policy. But here in the United States, there's always that constant balance and friction to be innovative, but yet provide that policy framework. And then later on, I'll get into the market forces component, which I know Diane can chime in here on. But I wanted to pivot to Rami a little bit also, because there's a workforce component here for the next generation that's important and it needs to be addressed. I was wondering if Rami could chime in.
Yes,
Rami, the floor is yours.
thank you. Yeah, I just want to actually mention what Glenn Glenn, I'm going to talk about this later on, but I'm going to also mention that the state of Indiana, I'm involved with many Ivy Tech, department chair, program chair, faculty, and student. Actually, with the state of Indiana, we have a model that actually right now used for the whole United States called the Indiana Executive Council in Cybersecurity. We have multiple sectors here. We're looking for the state, local government, finance, energy, water, and wastewater. We have communication, healthcare, defense, and elections. And actually, I was one time the chair for the communication broadband infrastructure for the state, interim chair for 1 year. And I agree with Glenn, the fact that we have a very diverse, different sectors when it comes in, also on the state levels, not only just on the federal levels. And I agree with you, this is really a lot of challenges there. We have to make sure academia, industry, nonprofit, everybody have to come together and have to agree on different policy. And the collaboration we have on the state levels, I mean, I'm sure Kenyatte also attend a lot of these meetings, and Mike and Shabir and so on and so forth. There are a lot of faculty attend these meetings. We really have to come united, all of us, under the umbrella of the governor support. That was part of the governor actually initiative here in the state of Indiana, and help us, all of us, we as university, we as a community college in state of Indiana, we involve our faculty, our student. We're working, actually, I have about 40 students work on a project to create a matrix for the state to make sure all these different sectors, they can collaborate together so we can create a collaboration and consistency in following this cybersecurity policy. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. So actually, that kind of segues into a question from the audience. And by the way, if you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to put those questions into the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can, and we'll get to them appropriately. But this question, it's more of a technology question. I'm going to put this one towards Rami and then open up to the floor. What impact is AI or OpenAI as well as large language models, LLMs, for cybersecurity. Are we in danger of these models weakening cybersecurity?
I'm going to defer this question to Dr. Diane. She's an expert in artificial intelligence, and I'll follow up after her and myself and Glenn.
Yeah, thank
I
you.
think
I
I'm just
appreciate
going to ask Dr. Diane first on
No,
a question.
no, I have a niche area, so it's, it's good to have lots of folks have, complementary areas as well, so they can weigh in. So I think what I've been doing, and I just came back from Hong Kong, and there was the session that I spoke on was in the proliferation of AI, what are the cybersecurity concerns? And just at a very basic level, and then we can go on, my colleagues can jump in. So we know, like, for example, and this is probably so basic for everybody here, but it's always nice to kind of paint the basic picture. So you can just give me a minute. So usually you would get some email that says, I need money, and it's in broken English, and it's like some weird template and all this stuff. And right away it's some scam, right? So you had enough indicators. There was a spelling mistake. It didn't quite look right. The English wasn't right. And it was asking you something about something you never, wouldn't have done before. So now with AI and the ability to aggregate so much data and to synthesize it and to find targets, AI has made cybersecurity, 8,000 times more worse in some ways to defend against it. So AI has really changed the world of ransomware. And as you know, ransomware is very, very, very prolific right now. There's a lot of ransomware attacks. And so because of AI, they can do more high level social engineering phishing expeditions, and that's how they've been able to actually do some pretty significant intrusions in the United States. Happened a lot from highly sophisticated phishing expeditions or social engineering in terms of finding out what your password is and getting someone's password, and then just being in a network for 10 minutes was enough to get them the data that they needed and the exfil that they needed to really put on the ransomware. And that was the last case that was example of is the Change Healthcare. United Healthcare, as you know, I think it was $22 million Bitcoin ransomware that United Healthcare ended up paying. That was all from a social engineering phishing thing. And they were only in the network for 10 minutes at the beginning, which then caused a whole bunch of other effects. So because of AI and the ability to really glean through data, find out, kind of where the vulnerabilities are, find out where, the patching hasn't been done, knowing just through so much opportunity for where people are positioned, what their networks look like, they could do much more targeted attacks on certain individuals to get deeper into networks and more high value networks. And then the last thing I was going to mention on ransomware, just since I'm talking about ransomware and I have the floor, I always like to tell people some of the statistics on ransomware, and I think it's actually going to get worse. 84% end up paying the ransom, okay, in writ large, but only 47% ended up getting their data back uncorrupted. So you think, oh, I'll pay the ransom, one and done. Like you think when the guy comes in or a gal comes in and they break into your house, they rob you, they're not going to come back the next week, right? It's not the same. There was actually a 3-time incident with Change Healthcare. They paid the ransom, they came back again, and they came back again. So 78% of those 84% that paid were breached again. And guess what happens the second time around they get breached in the ransomware?
They asked for more money.
They asked for more money. It was ridiculous. And it was usually within the same year. It might have been a slightly different actor, but they have promised similar things. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is that I just think AI and its ability to really, capture a lot of data and then synthesize it, I think it's going to get a little bit worse, which is, I think, another question that you're going to be asking later on in terms of, what can be done. But I at least wanted to set the stage for that because people aren't aware that, oh my God, the sophistication of these threats have just exponentially grown. And are we ready? Right? That's like a real concern for companies around the world and businesses and, you know, academia and private citizens. And you can imagine certain people having major targets on their head. Now there's, you know, very, very wealthy people are extremely concerned because they're just individually a target. So it's like the world has changed, right, in terms of this virtual environment. So I will turn it back.
All right. Fantastic on that one. That actually segues into another question I have, Dr. Diane.
Kenyatte,
Want to add something?
Sorry, can I add something to Dr. Diane? She mentioned a
Absolutely.
really critical point here. We were talking about artificial intelligence could be used in actually cyber attack. Of course, that's really lead us to the concept of weaponization of artificial intelligence that nowadays is used to create what they call these autonomous weapon system. And that also have to be the option when it comes in raising ethical and society concern. We have a lot of also potential risks for artificial intelligence also. We attend the Secret Service here in Chicago, the Cybercrime Task Force, CFTF, and there's a lot of presentation of how deep fakes and misinformation was used in the media. AI can actually be used to create realistic forgery of audio, video, images, and many and undermining the trust and spread of disinformation in the market. Here we've seen how many presidents we've been actually victim to deep fakes. That's very famous. Another also things when it comes into the artificial intelligence is the complexity, the increase of complexity and threat landscape. AI can make right now cyber attack more sophisticated. We teach cybersecurity right now in this classroom and make it very difficult to detect because the speed of AI, as Dr. Dan said right now, we're going up to 8,000, maybe 100,000 right now, the speed. The AI right now can be used to actually find a vulnerability or weaknesses. We call them exploit, right? Threats in the information system and be able to exploit these attacks at a very fast rate. And that's the reason our nation have to move on to actually start, like what you do at Ivy Tech right now here is to provide cybersecurity classes with background in artificial intelligence, because now we're going to send the student back again to Ivy Tech. We want to teach them the basic of what foundation artificial intelligence. It's not enough just to go and recount the system, show them using Nmap, for example, you know, network map tools. Nowadays, we actually have these artificial intelligence to write the knowledge base. We call it the expert system to find all different vulnerabilities and actually strengthen these vulnerability with counter artificial intelligence engine to protect our cybersecurity, national security also here in the United States.
The goal is to do it, you know, the criminals can do it without boundaries and without rules and can be as brute force as much as they want. The challenge with, you know, academia and businesses and, you know, they're slowed down a little bit just because of ethics to some degree, right? So it's like, how do you keep ahead of these criminals in terms of what you're doing? So we really, really have to leverage AI to help us keep ahead of them.
Yeah,
And I realized I didn't have Glenn actually respond to that. So Glenn, do you want to jump in on that?
sure, and I appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with my panelists here on this question, because it's fascinating for me from this perspective, right? Because I come from the security perspective in regards to operations, right? How do we secure our society and those aspects that society needs on a continual basis? And one of the things that's happening with the emergence of advanced technologies is that blending of technology to really not recognize those indicators of compromise. You're no longer able to detect, like Dr. Janosek was saying, was that it's getting so good that those indicators of compromise are really whittled down now. So from the perspective I take, and this is where I was going to get to with regards to zero trust, about 20 years ago, the security community in the world got together and anticipated that there was going to be a leap in the way security was being done, because technology was changing. With the adoption of cloud technology back then, they understood that the protection models that they had invested in for years was no longer going to hold, right? And so they had to think differently, and it was called the Jericho Forum, and it was convened in London. And so in around the 2005 era, they came together and recognized they have to come up with a different framework. And so I'm I don't have the answer here, but I'm curious because I've been investing a lot of study in regards to zero trust principles. If you're not aware of the zero trust principles that came out of Jericho Forum, it was really trying to think differently about cybersecurity, and eventually over those years, NSA came out with their three pillars of it, right? Never trust, always verify, assume breach, and then verify explicitly. And so that's the model that the United States has adopted through the executive order that came out in 2021, the EO 14028, that said the United States is going to invest. How do we adopt zero trust principles into our policy, into our processes here within the United States to protect our systems and our organizations? And so if you take that approach and you assume breach and you have a mechanism to explicitly verify and always understand that you're already assuming that it's not a trusted environment, so you assume that an email is already compromised, how do you put in now a model to verify and provide you some assurance that that email is indeed from who it was? You have attribution. And so if you study all the pillars of zero trust, from the data, the network, the user, the analytics, and the other components that the United States is adopting, I think it would be fascinating to see how that can be applied to AI and large language models to provide maybe some research for some of our students here to see, does zero trust principles apply at all, or could it be applied to something that's emerging now in this regard to the technology advances? So I put that out as a question, but I'd like to go into a little further when we get into more questions. Thank you.
Actually, I'm going to let you go on that further now.
Yeah. Okay.
Because,
Sure.
as I was thinking about it, there, we, at least in the United States, and actually I can even take this into organizations. It's always the balance of security versus, I would say, ease of use or convenience. And we always get into this balancing act. And the question is, okay, by adding zero trust, are we tipping scales one direction or another? But I would like for you to not necessarily give a complete description from the beginning of zero trust, but more along the lines of kind of some of the implications of using it in this particular sphere.
No, sure. I appreciate the opportunity. So I'm going to give you a story, and it happened to me personally while I was in the Coast Guard. So around 10 years ago plus, there was a requirement that all users had to authenticate with their cards, right? Their tokens. And so the model was such that as soon as that policy was implemented, every user throughout the entire ecosystem had to use that same process, right? And be verified. But here's what happened. The ships, the cutters out at sea have latent connectivity. They don't have the robust connections that we had on shore. And so immediately, once that policy was driven out by the Department of Defense that was levied on the Coast Guard, it shut down our fleet operations because they could no longer authenticate, because the delay time to authenticate the user at sea was so long that all the sessions were timing out and nobody could log on anymore. And that taught me a big lesson, that before implementing policy, you have to understand the operational impact. And so as it goes to that balance you're talking about, Professor, there's got to be some recognition. There's got to be research. There's got to be papers and looking at whatever policy that we're going to adopt. Where's the operational test, right? To get some artifacts so that we can provide evidence of possible failure points in implementing that policy. So that was my first thing I wanted to share in terms of the story. So let me go back to zero trust. So we're familiar with the triad, right? The confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability that we provide for our systems and our organizations. Well, from my perspective in implementing zero trust, especially for emerging tech, I add a little bit slightly component to it. So safety considerations are vital, right? The process safety, the environmental safety, the personal safety of whatever's being delivered. And then you're going to have the reliability of whatever you're delivering in the technology, and then the performance. So the triad still has the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, but I add this particular triad for zero trust applications that can be applied to additional models. And what I'm using this now is in operational technology, because the framework that we've been using for over 20 years is not speaking well to our critical infrastructure, our suppliers of energy, water, and vital utilities to the United States, because it's a different dialect. And so we need more security practitioners that have that operational background in critical infrastructure to help our communities overcome that language gap. But I'll give it that for some additional thought from my panelists. Hopefully that helps.
Chime in, whoever wants it. Rami, Dr. Diane, do you want to add to that?
Dr. Dayan, I'll defer to Dr. Dayan. Next.
I wasn't planning on answering it. Oh, you would like to go? Yeah.
Okay, so I tell you what, I'm going to come back to that.
No, it's just,
So
I mean, he offered a lot, so I wasn't really sure where to jump in on that one, but
that's fair.
Okay.
I think specifically maybe along the lines of he was talking about research ops test.
Yeah.
You know, I call it we used to call it testing outside of Happy Path. We know Happy Path works. Let's test with some variants. So digging deeper on the testing of these frameworks, how can we collaborate with public sector and possibly private sector to drive some of these frameworks together? Being involved in utility industry frameworks, for example, they can be very cumbersome. They can take a good while. With SIP, for example, it could take a good while for it. Sometimes you skip a number. How can we, with public sector and private sector, get faster with creating these frameworks to help with cybersecurity, to help with software bombs, to help with hardware bombs, so we can deal with some of these supply chain challenges potentially? And I'll open that to the floor. Rami has his hand up, so I'm going to let him take that question first.
So thank you, Kenyatte. So here's in Northwest Indiana, we have many entities that actually help us to bring the public sectors and private sector together. I've been for the last 12 years member of the Northwest Indiana Information Sharing and Security Alliance. We have meeting almost every month, and every time we meet in National Guard base, we go to the hospital, we go to different infrastructure, mission and critical infrastructure organization, including energy. We went to NISORS, we went to NIPSCO, all these different places. So there's a collaboration, I should say, between academia, federal, state, and also nonprofit organization, bringing also the industry, and we share all the resources. What happened in Northwest Indiana in 2008, we have a flood that actually, I'm giving an example of natural disaster that affect the U.S. steel industry here in Northwest Indiana. So because of that flood that took place, of course, we all went to FEMA, we applied for so on and so forth, and we shut down the highway that actually goes between Chicago, going all the way to Indiana and other state, because we're at the crossroad of what? United States, Indiana. That highway was actually down for 2 weeks, and many businesses and, you know, all this transportation were shut down, and that's impact. And that's the reason we actually created the Northwest Indiana, and we call it NISTA, Northwest Indiana Information Sharing and Security Alliance. And nowadays we're actually building multiple components of it. And one major component of the NISTA is really building a cyber command center. We can actually respond to cyber attack. And actually that right now taking the decision to be built in Northwest Indiana, specifically in Gary. And there's a lot of right now effort with the governor and a lot of decision maker right now to lead this effort. In addition, on the state levels, of course, we have our IECC, Indiana Executive Cybersecurity Council, that actually bring the whole state together to work together in different sectors, including we, academia, Ivy Techs, and bring the student. My student actually did a lot of internship, and now this is really bridging the gap between state, federal, academia. That right now, actually, a lot of my students get an internship. Some of them actually become a DoD scholar, get a full scholarship to go to Purdue Northwest. Part of actually getting that scholarship is attending that internship with different entity instead of Indiana. So absolutely, bridging the gap require actually bringing the resources, sharing resources between what a faculty can bring to the tables, what a federal agent can bring to the tables, and what is the state leaders can bring also to the tables. Collaboration between all this entity can make us better prepared. I'm not saying we're going to be 100% bulletproof, but better prepared for cyber attack. And I'll leave the stage for someone else to add to this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll jump in, and then Glenn, I think, wants to, Captain Hernandez wants to jump in. So I really appreciated the Captain Hernandez example of the maritime area, because I know people are probably familiar with this, but do you remember a number of years ago off the coast of Africa, and it's still happening, there was a lot of pirates, right? It was actually true piracy, like the real pirates are, taking over these ships, and it was like a big deal, remember? We were like, well, what the heck? And then we had our US Navy go down, and I think it was actually on Easter weekend. I think it was like this weekend a number of years ago that they went and they rescued and got the ship back. But however, the point was in cyber, when they were trying to think of an analogy a number of years ago, was maybe around 2017, they were saying what the analogy is to cyber in terms of like who's in control and how does it work and who really is the full force. They actually looked at the International Law of the Seas Convention, because that was kind of like, gathering of people to come together and kind of opine as to, what are the rules of the road essentially, in international waters. So that was interesting. And then we see that same challenge that we're having now with space, right? Because once you get up above so many, it was 110 nautical miles, I think it is, in the sky, that's international air, right? And then what are the rules in that area, especially with space and with even just with mining on Mars and things like that. So there's a treaty on the UN for outer space treaty, they call it. So I've done a lot of work actually in cybersecurity and outer space. However, now bringing this forward to where we are now, everyone's been seeing all these things, right? And this is the answer to your question, I think, Professor Simuel, about academia and partnerships and all that. Everyone's seeing these days now is all these aircraft accidents, right? And these aircraft accidents, we're like, are they happening more, or are they just what's going on, and like what is going on? So I know that some of you are probably familiar with Embry-Riddle, but so Embry-Riddle was one of the lead organizations, but I don't know if people realized it, that internationally, what is the language that pilots use to talk with air traffic controllers around the world? Anyone guess?
I do not
English.
know.
What?
English.
English. Joe. Yes, Joe. That's right. And it wasn't because the U.S. was the biggest guy on the block at the time. They really did go through it. It was eventually going to be French or English, but they decided to go with English. So English is the actual language of all the air traffic controllers. Well, how did that come about? I mean, can you imagine? Like, that had to be an international agreement, and it was truly done by many years of working things together, just like you have in the state of Indiana, trying to come together certain things with the Department of Energy and the energy sector, what you heard with Glenn in terms of the maritime security. So it takes a long time to get to some level of agreement to enforce it. And what they were finding was then also what happened is notwithstanding everyone, they're resigning on English, the way people use English is different, right? We even find that with our Five Eyes, with the Australians and the Americans and the Canadians and the Brits and the New Zealand, we speak English slightly differently. So they actually put a book out in 2020 on exact terms that they want everyone to use so that they would avoid these air incidences. So I often think about this world that we're living in, and cyber's been around for maybe about 20 years. I think the first textbook was done the first courses were coming out around 1999. So we're getting up to 25 years of this world that we're living in, but there's still so much nuances in terms of areas to move forward. So you're going to have partnerships between academia, industry, and the government, and you're going to have partnerships between governments, right? It's absolutely necessary to do that. I have an article that's going to be coming out in the with West Point's the cyber warfare journal is coming out, and it's specifically talking about how can you share cyber threat intelligence data without an intermediary, because the people may not be aware of it, but right now a lot of that sharing is done with the government being an intermediary and then sharing it across more broadly. And then in the UK, out of Brussels, they actually have an NGO, a non-governmental entity, being the middle person. And my belief is, when you heard example with Glenn in terms of policy slowing things down in the actual operational area, my sense is I don't think we need to have a middleman, be a government entity or an NGO, to necessarily be an intermediary to share CTI across sectors, across countries when appropriate, within trusted partners and trusted communities. So I'm a big fan of relooking at the cyber threat intelligence model globally. So just I think it has to be a partnership. And one of the things that I have spoken on in the Middle East, as I said, I've done a lot of things internationally, which is why they all call me Dr. Diane. So that's why I think it's so much easier for them to say. So everywhere I go, that's what they usually call me. But they internationally is they are thinking about the same thing, because like, who do you trust? How do you trust? What do you want to share? Because if something does happen to you, then they would know about it. So you have to feel comfortable whoever you're partnering with. So there's a huge trust issue you can imagine in this space, right? Just trust, and that's who we are as humans, right? I mean, we all want to make sure we're going to kind of, that's like a basic element. And so it's happened, that's the same thing happens with nation states. So I think all of my colleagues today have shared that perspective with you, is that notwithstanding this field being around for a little bit of time, there's been so much change, so much rapid change. Is technology pushing the policy? Is policy pushing the technology? Really, what is the end state? What do we want from humanity? What do we need from each other? How do we want to engage with each other in a way that we know who we're talking with, and we don't want to be talking with bots to bots? So it's really a new paradigm, and that's why I'm so impressed by having this hosting of this colloquium, that you're doing. I think that's awesome. So glad you're putting these thoughts out there. And to all the students on the call and all the professionals on the call, you are in the right place at the right time with the ability to make a difference. And that is my biggest level of optimism in the United States, is that we really have an appetite to do positive change and to do things for the good. And we really like to keep moving forward. We're the most innovative country in the world. So the fact that you have this many students on this call right now, and it's just talking about this topic very alone, this really is the future of where the United States is going. Can we stay ahead of this game? We are right now, but can we continue to do it? And we can't if we don't have those partnerships, thinking out of the box, thinking really where do we want to take it, and making sure we get the momentum behind it. So anyone on this call, you all have some type of ability to drive change and really garner that momentum and push it forward. So over to Glenn.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Diane. So I had I'll have 3 points. My third point is going to be very short, and I'll tie it back to Diane's point. But my first point is that we have an opportunity here in the United States to learn from our pockets of democracy throughout the states, the territories, right, that have leadership. Rami gave an excellent example how the state of Indiana is implementing, a statewide initiative throughout all elements of the government to really press academia, industry, and the workforce, and trying to come up with a model that works for their citizens, right? And it's going to be tailored here in the United States for each state's priorities. And what the United States has an opportunity here is to learn where are the best exemplars that we can use to generate that policy for the United States, if it needs to be a policy at all. And so let's learn from each other on how we can leverage those pockets of democracy throughout our country and get the best of that to help inform our decision makers and policy makers on the direction. My second point is, and it goes back to international, think about our lithography, right? Where did that start? Right, it started with our research labs here in the United States, right? From investment by partner in the government and in partner with our national labs, developing the technology to come up with the fabrication techniques and procedures, and then it was bought internationally. And to the point, no longer we can do it here in the United States. So there are market forces, dynamics that need to be taken in consideration, and our place internationally has to be recognized by the government here in the United States that that's an important element that can't be disregarded. You just can't push everything out the United States. You just can't insource everything in the United States. There's got to be some understanding of the market forces, because if you build something that nobody wants, you're never going to sell it, right? And nobody's ever going to continue investing in that type of model. So that's a very important element that needs to be addressed and made aware of. My third point, which Diane led to, is that you all that are participating in this, you're maturing your understanding of the language, right? This language needs to be matured. So when you go out and you talk to your colleagues, you start talking with your professors, you talk with your potential employers, right? You need to mature your understanding of how do you put this all together in a language that makes sense to your peers, to leaders, to the folks that you're mentoring for the future, because that understanding of your engineering background, your academics, and how you communicate the liberal arts are all pieces that can add value to your professional career over time, like all my colleagues have here on the panel have done. So this is an excellent forum, I believe, that needs to be carried further. So that the United States has those nonprofits or those entities that can bring about the best in what we do in each of our states.
Excellent. Great answers from everyone on the panel. And definitely, I think we are definitely looking to make this bigger and better every year that we can. And to have this type of discussion, have this type of interaction is fantastic for everyone here on the panel. And, we need more of these. So I would be remiss if I...
Yeah, but one thought on that though, Professor, is that, I mean, this could spawn, ideas for students for their senior thesis or their master's, or, in terms of deeper research, because we've identified amongst the four of us and the prior speaker as well already a number of emerging areas that need new thought, in terms of where things are going. And so the themes that have already been presented today are so ripe for students to really explore. You could tie your colloquiums into theses. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think even past the thesis scenarios, there's a lot of applied research that can be done here, even at the 1 year, 2 year level as well. So there's a lot of what I would call low-hanging fruit that can be gathered here. The zero trust topics is actually kind of one that has my head spinning myself, just being on this panel, of some positive momentum that could come out of that. And there's plenty of other topics that we've touched on that we can just expand on, not to mention from a policy perspective. So going across disciplines to a certain extent into some of the legal ramifications is very good as well. So and thank you for that, Dr. Diane. I would be remiss if I didn't have a quantum computing question. So I did get a technical one in the chat, but I think I'm going to try to combine them a little bit. What are the potential national security implications of quantum computing and how can the U.S. maintain its competitive edge in this field? And I would say, there's a lot of different moving parts in this. With quantum teleportation of data that's starting to come out there. Hardware manufacturers, there's going to be material that's needed for this. How do we maintain this edge in the United States from a security perspective and from a practical perspective? And I will open that to anyone on the floor that wants to take that question.
So Kenyatte, if I can start, I did some research. I did a lot of work, my undergrad and grad for quantum computing. I believe right now, United States government must invest in quantum workforce development. They should also increase the collaboration between multiple, multiple sector like government, academia, industry, and also create, as I mentioned before, a post-quantum cryptography. National security when it comes into quantum computing is critical because we're talking right now about encryption, vulnerabilities, cybersecurity risk, emerging technology that actually could accelerate the creation or development of new weapon system that other technology with potential national security implication. We did talk about the encryption vulnerability. As we know, the quantum computing can potentially break at very fast rate, I should say super rate, not fast rate, widely used encryption, existing encryption like famous RSA and ECC and some other symmetric, asymmetric encryptions. And that could actually jeopardize our national security when it comes into breaking encryptions. The cybersecurity risk, I would also like to add that our adversary, they could actually create a quantum computers technology, and they could pose a security threat to national security by actually compromising our government and private sector network. So we're not only just government, we also, not public sector, but also the private sectors. And I hope that I just gave you some beginner introduction to quantum computing. Dr. Diane, if you want to add, or Captain Hernandez, if you want to add to the conversation, please feel free.
No, you're completely spot on. And just in this post-quantum world that they're, looking at right now, and people are probably aware of this already, but there are large encrypted data sets available mostly on the dark web for purchase, even though there's no encryption to break it yet, recognizing that they'll be able to break it in the future. And there's assuming that there'll be a value that's from the, once they're able to read that data and read those those state secrets, so to speak. So people are posturing now, and that's not even, quantum, so that people are already thinking now it's going to be broken and what do you have to do going forward. So it's a major area. I generally stay away from talking about quantum because I have some classified knowledge. I'm always worried if I'm going to say something that I shouldn't have said. So I'm going to turn it over to Glenn if he wants to add more.
I don't have it, so you don't have to worry about me.
Okay.
So thanks, Diane. So I come from the operational perspective, right? And I think there needs to be research on the impacts and the risks and the vulnerabilities our infrastructure. I think about cryptocurrency. What are the threats to that in the future if we don't prepare for the risks? I know NIST is trying to come up with models to be resistant to quantum computing in the future. So coming up with a cryptography method that can be more resistant to quantum computing. But regardless of that work, there's got to be research on the threats and vulnerabilities of our infrastructure, our critical infrastructure, and the things that we need, like our banking systems, right? Where is the thoughts on what protections that we need to put and start making those timelines? Will it take 10 years? Will it take 15 years, right? And laying that foundation, because we already know from a manufacturing standpoint here in the United States, we're a ways from doing that here. And so we got to develop those partnerships internationally on coming up with frameworks. How are we going to secure our society? Because if we don't, it's going to be open to those vulnerabilities. Our threat actors, they have a incentive model, right, that doesn't have ethics, that blends borders and boundaries of our international construct. And so they will continually find those vulnerabilities. So are we going to understand that first or are we going to allow our adversaries to discover them and then we're reacting? And so this is where I think academia has a role to help out in partnership with the government and incentives. The only thing I'm sort of concerned about is the Cobra effect, right? You don't want a perverse incentive. You don't want to incentivize something so that it creates a worse problem. And so you can research the Cobra effect. It's something that's going around in cyber circles now, and something that you can do after this session today. But it's something I'm always attentive to. And so trying to think differently about models to protect in the future. And with the onset of quantum computing, where ones and zeros don't really, well, actually the ones and zeros are simultaneously happening. And so how do you provide that distinction in our systems? It's going to be a critical point if we don't understand the risk today. So at least being aware of those risks and preparing for the future is vital.
I was going to mention, I was hoping to find the article. I pulled it out, but I don't think I have it right here. Another area that you could look up besides the Cobra effect is, I don't know if I've seen that the case about, it was an article explaining how North Korea criminals were able to steal so much cryptocurrency. It was like millions of dollars of crypto that they stole in a very, very short period of time before they even realized it was happening. But they did it through some level of social engineering at the front. So, and many folks that are interested in that type of stuff, I was like, this is going to be a movie one day, because once all the facts come out. But that is just, the whole cryptocurrency world in and of itself is interesting. They didn't break the cryptology, but they got access to it and able to steal a whole lot of it. So, currency is currency.
And I wanted to add something because I talk about adversary a lot. There's another area that fascinates me in terms of cybersecurity, is that it happens internally, right? Mistakes are occurred during the software process. We learned it from the CrowdStrike Microsoft process last year, right? That wasn't an adversary necessarily. It was a flaw in the patch engineering that didn't recognize that it went down to a level in the computing that caused the reboots. And so that process, if it was automated and it was pushed out, it broke those systems. Whereas organizations that had a process that engineered, tested that patch before it was rolled out, they survived. They were more resilient. So, and then another story that resonates with me with what happened in Oldsmar, Florida, with the water system, right? If you recall, in that particular incident, there was all this hype about a threat actor breaking in to the water system and affecting some of the solution to possibly poison the community. Well, several years after the fact in the investigation, that to me, my lesson learned, that was the response was worse than the actual incident itself, right? And so there's factors that we talk about cybersecurity is not always adversary attributed, right? It has to be something that leadership and the folks that are looking at the organization, they need to be aware. How do they respond? And so I know we're talking about quantum computing here, but in some regards, it's really about human factors and policy that can make organizations more aware of some of the risks that may be coming with emerging tech.
That's I'm so glad you mentioned that, Glenn. I actually passed Oldsmar in January, February, when I was down in Florida. I was like, oh my goodness. I just put in the okay, I can read your question in a minute. So I just put in the link, an article. It's just the PDF, but if you go to my website, which is dianejanosek.com, under publications, the original source is the US Cybersecurity magazine. I put the PDF there, and there's also the link to the magazine itself. It is what went wrong and what went well in Oldsmar, Florida. And it happened at a time, and it was an interesting, I wanted to do as a case study. I did a case study on the Oldsmar case because it was just the weirdest thing. And the whole thing about that is that, I'm not saying what to say in the article, but it was on a Friday after Friday. The guy it was a male, saw his mouse move around 9:30, and he was like, what? And then he saw it happen again at 1:30 on a Friday. And that's when he realized, okay, something's happening. Someone's got, access to my device. So had he not been paying attention at 1:30 or left early for the day, would have stayed over there over the weekend. Okay, so I see the traitor of the Lazarus
Yeah,
Group.
there was a question put in
Yes.
about the North Korea. Yep.
Yeah, I just looked to see, I wish I've just double checked. I don't have that article with me. It might be behind a firewall online because it was in the Wall Street Journal. So I don't recall exactly the name of the group. It might, I mean, I know the Lazarus Group. I just don't recall the exact actor that did this you know, the Bitcoin theft, the massive theft. But I did want to mention one other thing. Do I have a second?
Oh, you got plenty of time.
Okay. So since we're just talking about North Korea, but thank you, Glenn, for mentioning that Oldsmar and Florida water incident, because that's a very simple article that I've posted in the link there. But then what we've learned is that once they realized that there was so much availability, so easy to do, you know, there's been so many more water attacks, which is just crazy, that it keeps happening. So, you know, water treatment plants are actually very important to the United States, especially for individuals to have confidence in the ability of their government to take care of them and protect them, because, you know, we don't have control over how we get our water necessarily unless you have your own well. So you want them to be some type of secure processes in, you know, water and cleaning of the water and the providing of it. So there was a question as a follow-up prior to this session today that Kenyatte shared with me. So one of the questions is how do you attribute who's behind cybersecurity threats? How do you know who's there? And, you know, kind of what's going on. So we mentioned earlier, and I know that my colleagues shared this as well, the use of AI and the data analytics is making cyber much more sophisticated, more volume, more targeted, and much harder to identify. So the challenge that you have with cyber attacks is you may know what, you know, where maybe the, you know, the URL or the ISP that they're using, and generally maybe what country, but you may not. And a lot of it's obfuscated and you don't always know who the actual actor is behind the scenes. So identifying and attributing a threat actor is actually very, very difficult. And also because it takes a lot of time and effort, and some of the entities that are getting attacked don't have the ability to really, you know, report it and then also share it and then share the signatures, and also there's just a lot. So, but there was a report that came out that I wanted to share about 2023 on who's behind cyber attacks. Before I give you the examples there, but I wanted to let you know also is that there is a documentary coming out called The Dawn of Cyber Warfare. And I'm in that documentary. It's going to be on Netflix coming out in the fall, The Dawn of Cyber Warfare. You can Google it. And I talk about right now how the most amount of threats are to NATO-based countries. So the NATO-based countries are the ones that are the most attacked. So then the question then was, well, who's behind those cyber attacks, right? So since Spiros mentioned North Korea, I thought I'd throw out these statistics. So of the attribution to Statistica, STATISTA, I typically do like their research. So just so I can share that, since you're a research group here, Statistica, this is one of their reports. They said based upon their surveys, their research, 44% have not been identified in terms of as a nation state actor or where they're coming from or who they're partnering with. That is a lot. That's a pretty high number, right? 40% not to know who's attacking you. And then I'm sure this group will get this, but who do you think is next and who's behind cyber attacks? We'll put it in the chat or just say it. I know you all know. Who's
I
the
wouldn't go
largest?
out there. Either
Panda.
China or Iran.
Panda.
Panda, you said?
Russia.
So you're pretty close. So 11.9% is China and 11.6% is Russia. Iran drops to 5.3% of the attacks. But it could be higher, right? So you don't know the 40% of unattributed. North Korea is about 4.7. Ukraine is 2.6. United States is 2.3. 1.8% is Pakistan. 1.7% is Turkey. And 13.4% is all the other countries combined. So I see you wrote Israel there. They are very good in terms of masking. So they could have some, William, I saw your answer there. They're very good at masking. They're actually really good at cyber defense. So as well. So yeah, they're not listed here specifically in this chart, but they could be part of the non-identified or other countries. But I thought this is who's doing the volume of the attack. So you can imagine the amount of people that are in China, and they have a conscription service in terms of people must join the military, and they're doing a lot of it. And Glenn knows this from his national defense days in terms of, they place a lot of assets into the cyber arena. So I'm not surprised that they would have the highest number of attributed cyber attacks. And they probably have a large number of the unattributed ones as well. So I said, is that kind of what you were looking for in terms of that question you provided me earlier, Professor?
Yes, actually, and it was perfect timing because I was going to ask that question. So you hit it on the head. So fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to ask a question, and this was not on the question list, but if there is one thing that you could change or add that would help in this arena, what would that be? And I'll start, anyone can take that question, and we'll just go around the panel. If there's one thing you could change across the board in this arena, what would that be? Who wants it first?
Kenyatte, I'd like to add this one. So me as a college professor and teach at Ivy Tech, I see this as every day when it comes into cybersecurity education and emerging technology that has a major threat on national security. And that is really, I always start with educating the student. So we don't have enough resources. Nowadays, we start actually seeing some solution to this problem right now, such as Cyber Range at Ivy Tech. We use at Valpo campus, Lake County campus, myself and Professor Spiros, we use the Simpire, which is a state-of-the-art cyber range that we can do cyber operation. When it comes in to me as a challenge here, we address right now national security threat with emerging technologies. But again, we're having a problem that is really providing the tools to the student. And these tools, I have a student who actually comes to me, don't have a laptop to actually provide cyber education. And when we use the school resources, and now with the cyber range that we have right now, we could escalate our knowledge. And we went national. We went last year to Washington, D.C. We went U.S. Cyber Challenge, and we went multiple National Cyber League, a lot of cyber competition. It takes a lot of work to actually educate and provide student and pipelines like Glenn and Captain Hernandez and Dr. Janos, Dr. Diane Janosek is very active when it comes into cyberseek.org, which is really great tools for students to see the difference, the need, the demands for cyber education. But my challenge here, our challenge at Ivy Tech, is to provide the resources and environment, the ecosystem, the cybersecurity ecosystem to provide cybersecurity education. Some other nation, I don't mention other nation, but we talk about our adversary. Well, some places in the world, some cyber actor, they start cyber education at, I'm not exaggerating, not really at middle school, but they started at elementary schools. And that's a problem for us. How are we going to actually have somebody go into college to attend Chicago State University, Ivy Tech, cybersecurity, courses if they have not started this as early stages? So that's something I would like to actually add to the conversation what Dr. Diane and Captain Hernandez, they can actually suggest for this solution. Thank you.
Dan, you want me to go? Okay.
Yep, you can go, Glenn.
So if I had an opportunity going back through my experience, I would want to see the incentives of our country focus on teachers in terms of their impact. If we compensated teachers for the impact they have on society and the influence they have to commit to change and progress and innovation, and we compensated them based on that, it would be an incredible dynamic shift, right? Because right now with social media and the attention on athletes and entertainment and other forms of influence, where's the teacher that's really having that daily influence on our future generation to get interested in careers that we are already passionate about? But it has to start at that level, because by the time they go to high school and even college, it's almost too late, right? The planting of the seed has already occurred a decade before. So if we were to really put our money where we think our priority should be, it should be in the teachers that provide that opportunity for our future to innovate and be focused on careers like STEM in the future. That's what I would change.
Well, I think both of you are spot on. So with respect to an example of that, my kids' schools, when they were younger, in grade school, they had this buddy system, and you started in 4th grade having a kindergarten buddy, and then you followed them through as you know, so they by 8th grade you had a buddy as well. So the point was, even though you're young, you actually can offer something behind you to pull them up and make them better, like help other people. So, even freshmen in college can help high schoolers, high schoolers can help the middle schoolers, and constantly bringing them forward. So that is only going to happen if we kind of change this paradigm. So I think, but I'm often asked this question that you just asked to all of us, and this is what I usually say. Cybersecurity is not that long of a field. The merger of AI, even the microelectronics world and cyber coming together, it really does need a multidisciplinary approach. There's a lot of critical thinking going to be involved. We're just changing things. There's not been a dramatic amount of change in the technology in the US. I don't really see until in the last number of years or so, people started really pushing things to really move things forward. I think we're going to accelerate in the area of technology. So what I would like to offer is that this world that we're living in, this field, this very narrow field, including the nanotechnology field and cybersecurity field, we have collectively have the ability to shape the tone of our community for the future. The financial sector, as we know, has been around for a long time. To me, it's very much more cutthroat. It's definitely male dominated in certain regards. And there's certain behaviors that are tolerated. And what I would say here is the field that we're in, we want to be the cool kids and the fun group that works really hard, and we're really smart, and we're making a difference. And we like working with each other. We're collaborative, we're curious, we want to learn, like, hey, let's figure out this and move this forward. We're wired differently. And what we want to make sure is that we preserve that uniqueness of our community. We really protect it. We encourage people that have those characteristics to join our field, and so we become the envy of everyone else, because we want to really make the difference, and we're going to set the tone for our environment, for our culture moving forward, so that we excel and we have fun while we're doing it. So my charge to all of you is, all of you have that ability to really influence the tone. Let's not, accept, behaviors that we don't like, and say, no, we're going to make these as team. This is a team sport because of how we're doing it. And we do need the best athletes to move forward in the field, but we're going to do it collaboratively, and in a way that people want to be us, right? I think that's and I think that's how the nation's going to survive in terms of, maintaining its innovation bent. So that's where I would leave it. And if I could just close on one thing before I know we're ending up here, so I won't take the floor again, but I would, if I can help your school at all, please let me know if I can help, the 2 institutions and your center, because I'm a big believer in doing what you're doing. I also am very familiar with you might be interested in a cyber threat intelligence and analyst platform, so that you can actually become a cyber analyst. There's a fairly inexpensive program that's out there that links you up, so you can have some really good internships that would posture you for example for Rami for those the DoD Cyber Scholarship Program that's out there, as well as some other scholarships. So that's available to you if you want to follow it up. And I actually would like to talk with you, Rami, about that separately for the Northwest Indiana Consortium. And then to all the folks on this call, I have, as I mentioned, my website is dianejanosek.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. There's another Diane Janosek in Indiana, actually, the only one that I've found. She has blonde hair. So I have red hair, so you'll be able to tell the difference. So obviously I have cybers, but if I can help any of you, please connect with me on LinkedIn. And I try to respond to my messages as long as you're not selling me something. I generally do connect with people, and if I can help them in any way, I'm happy to do that, because like I said, I mean, my goal here is to change and evolve our community to the better. And any way I can do that is the way that we, is helping each other. So put that out there. And thank you so much for the opportunity to contribute today. And I'll stop talking with that one.
Thank you so much, Dr. Diane, Captain Hernandez, as well as Rami. This has been a fantastic panel, and I think we had some great conversation, great ideas. Hopefully everyone on this call, especially the students, got really good information out of this and can take it and move forward with it for sure. And definitely, Dr. Diane, I will be calling you at some point or sending an email along with Rami and probably quite a few others. So I do want to open the floor to anyone if they have any questions that they would like to ask of the panel. We don't have a lot of time, just probably field one or two if it's out there. So.
So while we have a few seconds, I just wanted to provide some advice to the students out there, if you allow me, Professor. Yep. From my perspective, we always think about, where am I going to get my next job? How do I get money to do this and do that? At least in my experience, you'd be amazed how volunteerism really can drive you to areas you never thought of. And so throughout my career, I always found at least that 5 to 10% of my organization and my personal time to volunteer for an organization that's nonprofit, has a community presence, and maybe has a technical focus. And I found that through my time, and I got involved, and it put me in contact with people throughout my network that have lasted decades. And so I would encourage folks to think about volunteer opportunities as an area to not only participate, but also learn, right? Learn about organizations, learn about your community, learn about the people that are involved, because you never know, as you go through your professional career, when those relationships and that understanding of the organization will come back to serve later on in your career. So I would encourage folks to volunteer if they find that they have time to do that.
Also, Professor Kenyatte, if I can add to Captain Hernandez's point, is with Ivy Tech, we have a lot of diversity when it comes into getting excited about coding, cybersecurity. We have the coding clubs. We also coding ninjas. We also have the Women of Cybersecurity Club. This is really huge because my student just came in from Denver, Colorado, attended the huge, every year we participate. We have a full-time faculty that she take the students, very active. We have a lot of STEM-based scholarship and organizations. So I add into the volunteering, also attend conferences like Women in Cybersecurity, join your cyber clubs in your campus, or create one. Like right now, we have one in Lake County, and we have one also in different, in Valparaiso. We have all over the state. We have different cyber club that actually encourage that learning and creating an ecosystem here. And the most important things is always be thirsty for learning and never be shy to ask questions, and provide that environment in your house, not just really on the school system, but also set up your own environment, cybersecurity environment at your house. You can practice this amazing emerging technology. And don't be afraid to actually join a lot of conferences. This morning, my student actually attended the Secret Service CFTF in Chicago. I could not go because I have to be in a colloquium today, and have a 20 student coming in from Briar student graduating from bachelor's, master's, and PhD student reaching out to me. Are you coming? I said, no, I have to come to the colloquium today, so I couldn't make it. But be active. Join the FBI InfoGuard, U.S. Secret Service, CFTF. Go to these conferences. Be part of any kind of ecosystem when it comes into your community, and be active. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenyatte, and thank you. I really appreciate your contribution. That was an amazing panel. I personally learned a lot. Thank you for your contribution, for your time, for the energy you provided, and for the ideas you shared with students. That's amazing. I really appreciate it. This is for the first colloquium that you set the stage very high. Thank you so much.
Great job.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
And really appreciate IVTech's support for the panel, because without you, this is not going to be this panel.